There are days that belong entirely to grief. Days when the world should have the decency to stop. When the phones should go quiet and the emails should wait. And every ordinary thing should understand that today is not an ordinary day. The day we buried my wife was supposed to be one of those days. Margaret Ann Holloway, 59 years old, 31 years of marriage. The woman who had laughed at my terrible jokes and finished my sentences and held my hand through every hard thing and made the house on Birchwood Lane into something that felt, every single evening when I came home to it, like the best place on earth. We buried her on a Saturday morning in April. The service was at 10. The cemetery was 15 minutes from our house. The flowers were white. She had asked for white. In the document she had prepared with the quiet practicality of a woman who understood she was running out of time and wanted to spare the people she loved from having to make decisions in the middle of their grief. I was standing at the grave when my phone rang. I did not recognize the number. I almost did not answer. But something, I cannot explain what, only that it was real, told me to pick up. Mr. Holloway, the voice said. My name is David Chen. I was Margaret's CEO at Ardmore Financial. I am so sorry for your loss. I know this is the worst possible timing. A pause. But I need you to see something. Today, if possible. It cannot wait. I looked at the white flowers on my wife's grave. What is it? I said. Not over the phone, he said. Please. Come to the office when you're ready. I'll be here all day. What I have to show you. It changes everything. I did not know, standing at that grave on that April morning, how completely he was right. Welcome back to Dad's True Revenge. This one starts at a graveside and ends somewhere you will not expect. Get comfortable. Let me tell you about my wife before I tell you what her CEO had found. Because Margaret deserves to be known as more than the subject of a secret. She deserves to be known as herself. Margaret Ann Holloway, née Cartwright, 59 years old. She had grown up in a small town in western Pennsylvania, the daughter of a coal miner and a nurse. Two people who had given her the specific combination of toughness and warmth that she carried through everything she ever did. She had studied finance at Penn State, worked her way up through a regional banking institution, and joined Ardmore Financial Group 22 years before she died as a mid-level analyst. Over those 22 years, through the specific combination of extraordinary competence and the kind of patient persistence that does not make noise but never stops moving, she had risen to become the company's director of investment strategy. She was, in the estimation of everyone who worked with her, brilliant. She was also, in the estimation of everyone who loved her, the most generous person they had ever known. She remembered every birthday, every anniversary, every detail of every story anyone had ever told her. She sent cards for things that did not require cards. Promotions and new homes and recovered illnesses and ordinary Tuesdays when someone she cared about had mentioned they were having a hard time. She had been diagnosed with ovarian cancer 23 months before she died. She had handled the diagnosis the way she handled everything, with clear eyes and steady hands and the particular grace of a woman who had decided that the time she had left was not going to be spent in fear. She had worked until 4 months before she died. Her team, David Chen told me later, had not known how ill she was until she stopped coming in. She had not wanted them to treat her differently. That was Margaret. I had loved her for 31 years, and I was not finished. I went to Ardmore Financial at 3 in the afternoon. Our daughter, Claire, had come for the service and was staying through the weekend. I told her I had an errand. I did not tell her what kind, because I did not know what kind yet, and because Claire had enough to carry that day without adding uncertainty. Ardmore Financial occupied the 14th and 15th floors of a building downtown. I had been there twice before, once for a company event, once to pick Margaret up when her car was in the shop. The lobby had the specific quality of financial company lobbies. Marble, quiet, the architecture of solidity. The receptionist on 14 was expecting me. She brought me to a conference room where David Chen was waiting. David Chen was 54, compact, silver-haired, with the particular focused energy of a man who had been carrying something heavy for several days and was relieved to be setting it down. He shook my hand with both of his. Mr. Holloway, thank you for coming. I cannot tell you how sorry I am about Margaret, she was. He stopped, composed himself. She was the best person I have worked with in 30 years. I mean that without qualification. I know, I said. Thank you. He sat down. I sat across from him. Between us on the conference table was a folder and a laptop and the specific atmosphere of a room in which something important was about to be said. Mr. Holloway, he said, what I'm about to show you, I want you to know that I discovered this 4 days ago. I have not told anyone else. I wanted to come to you first because it belongs to you and because Margaret, I believe, would have wanted you to hear it from someone who respected her. Tell me, I said. He opened the laptop. Margaret had been, for the last 11 years of her career at Ardmore, the architect of a proprietary investment strategy that the company had built its highest performing fund around. The Cartwright method. They had named it internally after her maiden name, a small acknowledgement of its origins that had never been made public. The fund had performed exceptionally for 11 years, significantly above market, significantly above anything Ardmore's competitors were producing with comparable risk profiles. 3 months before Margaret died, Ardmore Financial had been acquired by a larger institutional group called Meridian Capital Partners. The acquisition had been significant, $420 million. The Cartwright method and the fund built around it had been a central element of the valuation. David Chen had been going through post-acquisition documentation when he found something that had stopped him cold. Margaret's original employment contract, signed 22 years ago, renewed twice, most recently 8 years ago, contained a clause in Section 14, subsection C. He turned the laptop toward me. I read it. Any proprietary investment methodology developed by the employee during the course of employment, where said methodology can be demonstrated to have originated substantially from the employee's independent intellectual work and innovation, shall entitle the employee to intellectual property compensation equivalent to 4% of any transaction value in which said methodology constitutes a primary valuation driver. I read it twice. Then I looked up at David Chen. 4% of the acquisition, I said. 4% of $420 million, he said quietly. Yes, I sat with that number for a moment. $16,800,000. She never claimed it, I said. She never knew, David said. Or, I think she may not have fully understood what it meant in the context of an acquisition. The clause was written 22 years ago, when an acquisition of this scale was not something anyone was anticipating. He paused. She may have thought it was standard boilerplate, but it wasn't. It was not, he said. It was specific, and it was binding, and it survived both contract renewals because no one on either side caught it. He looked at me steadily, including, I'm sorry to say, Meridian's legal team during the acquisition due diligence. Why are you telling me this? I said. You work for Meridian now. This is a significant liability for your employer. David Chen looked at his hands for a moment. Then he looked at me. Because Margaret Holloway spent 22 years building something extraordinary for this company, he said. And she died 4 months after the acquisition that her work made possible. And her family received nothing from that transaction. He paused. And because I have been in this industry for 30 years, and I have seen a great many things done and left undone, and this is one that I am not willing to leave undone. I looked at this man, Margaret's CEO, someone she had worked beside for a decade, and I understood something about why she had stayed at Ardmore for 22 years. What do I need to do? I said. You need an attorney, he said, a good one. Someone who understands intellectual property and employment contract law. He slid a business card across the table. I cannot recommend anyone officially, but I can tell you that the attorney whose card that has handled a similar case 8 years ago, and I can tell you that Meridian does not yet know this conversation happened. I picked up the card. David, I said, why today? Why call me on the day of the funeral? He was quiet for a moment. Because I was afraid, he said simply. Afraid that if I waited, something would change, that the window would close, that Meridian's legal team would find the clause in their own review and move to address it before you had the chance to. He looked at me. Margaret would not have wanted that. No, I said. She would not. I picked up the folder. I stood up. Thank you, I said, for being the kind of person she would have trusted. He stood and shook my hand again. She talked about you, he said, regularly. 30 years of inside jokes and terrible puns and a man who still left notes in her lunch bag. He smiled, briefly and genuinely. She was very proud of your marriage. I walked out of Ardmore Financial into the April afternoon and sat in my car for 22 minutes before I trusted myself to drive. Her name was Sandra Osi, 50 years old, Oxford trained, with 23 years of intellectual property and employment law and the specific quality of attention that makes a person feel, in the middle of a complicated situation, that they are in exactly the right hands. I called her Monday morning. She had me in her office by noon. I laid everything on her desk. David Chen's explanation, the contract, the clause, the acquisition figures. She read the relevant sections 3 times. Slowly, without expression, in the way of someone who is being very careful not to form a conclusion before they have finished forming it. Then she set the document down and looked at me. Mr. Holloway, she said, this clause is valid. It survived both renewals. It is specific in its language and the conditions it describes. Proprietary methodology, primary valuation driver, are demonstrably met. She paused. This is a significant claim. How significant? I said. At 4% of 420 million, the gross figure is $16.8 million, she said. After legal fees and taxes, the net to you would be considerably less. But still, she looked at the document. Still very significant. What are the complications? Meridian will contest, she said. They will argue the clause was not applicable, or that it was superseded, or that the Cartwright method was a collaborative rather than individual creation. These are standard positions. She looked at me. None of them are strong positions, based on what you have shown me. But they will make it slow, and they will make it expensive. I understand, I said. There is another option, she said. Before litigation, a formal letter clearly establishing the claim, inviting Meridian to negotiate a settlement. Many companies in this position prefer settlement to the reputational exposure of a court case. Send the letter, I said. She sent it on Wednesday. Meridian's legal team responded on Friday. The negotiation took 11 weeks. I will not walk you through every exchange because much of it was technical and all of it was slow, and because the outcome is what matters. Meridian contested. As Sandra had predicted, they argued that the methodology was collaborative, that the clause had been superseded by the most recent renewal, that the acquisition valuation was based on multiple factors of which the Cartwright method was only one. Sandra dismantled each argument methodically. Margaret's original research notes, which I had found in the second week in a filing cabinet in her home office, dated and detailed and entirely in her handwriting, established the methodology's origins clearly and unambiguously. The contract renewals had not modified Section 14, and Ardmore's own internal documentation, which David Chen provided through proper legal channels with the full knowledge of what he was doing, confirmed that the Cartwright method had been specifically cited as a primary driver of valuation in the acquisition proposal. After 11 weeks, Meridian made an offer, $11.2 million. Net to me, after fees and taxes, $9.4 million. Sandra recommended I accept. I accepted on a Thursday afternoon, sitting in her office with the April light coming through the window and a cup of coffee I had not touched, thinking about Margaret at her desk in Ardmore's 14th floor office, building something extraordinary for 22 years. She had never known what it was worth. She knew now. In the way that matters, the permanent, unchangeable way, I signed the documents. I told my daughter Claire on a Sunday evening, 6 weeks after the settlement closed. She came for the weekend. She had been coming monthly since Margaret passed. The way children come when they understand, finally and completely, that a parent is alone and that presence is the only thing that actually helps. We had dinner. I let her have the meal. Then I put a folder on the table. She looked at it, then at me, then she opened it. She read for a long time. When she looked up, her eyes were bright, and her face was doing several things simultaneously. The specific expression of someone receiving information that is simultaneously wonderful and devastating, that belongs entirely to joy and entirely to grief at the same time. Mom, she said. That was all, just the word. She built something extraordinary, I said. For 22 years, she just didn't know how extraordinary. Claire pressed her fingers to her mouth. What are you going to do with it? She said. I had spent 6 weeks thinking about that question. Margaret had spent 29 years sending cards for things that did not require cards. She had volunteered at a food bank every second Saturday for 15 years. She had paid, quietly and without announcement, for the college application fees of 3 students in our neighborhood whose families could not afford them, because she had overheard a conversation at a school event and decided that was not something she was going to walk past. She had been, in every sense that mattered, a woman who used what she had to do what was right. What Margaret would have done with it, I said. We spent the rest of that Sunday evening, Claire and I, at the kitchen table where Margaret had made every important decision of our family life, planning a scholarship fund at Penn State in Margaret's name for first-generation finance students, fully endowed in perpetuity, a significant gift to the food bank where she had volunteered, a trust for Claire, structured the way Margaret would have structured it, careful, considered, designed to support without diminishing, and a portion set aside, a specific, meaningful portion, for the college application fees of students in this neighborhood, and the next one, and the one after that, because Margaret had paid for 3, and I intended to pay for considerably more. The rest went into a managed fund, carefully, the way Margaret would have managed it. Sandra Osi oversaw all of it. She told me, when we were finished, that it was the most thoughtfully structured philanthropic plan she had seen in 23 years of practice. I told her she had clearly never met Margaret. She smiled. She sounds like she was remarkable. She was, I said. She still is. In every single thing she built. David Chen attended the scholarship fund's inaugural ceremony at Penn State the following spring. He sat in the third row and did not introduce himself to anyone and left quietly after the presentation. I caught him in the parking lot. We stood there in the April light, almost exactly 1 year from the day he had called me at my wife's graveside, and I thanked him for the second time. You didn't have to do what you did, I said. Your employer would have preferred you hadn't. No, he said, they would not. A pause. I'm no longer with Meridian as it happens. I looked at him. These things have a way of becoming known, he said simply. I don't regret it. Margaret would have liked you very much, I said. He smiled, the real kind. She did, he said. She told me once that the best investment anyone could make was in the right people. He looked at the building where, inside, 4 students were beginning something because of a woman they would never meet. I think she was right. I drove home to Birchwood Lane. The house was quiet in the way it had been quiet since April. The specific, particular quiet of a place that used to be full and is learning, slowly, to hold a different kind of presence. I made dinner, sat at the kitchen table, looked at the chair where Margaret had sat for 31 years. She had built something extraordinary, and because a man with the right values had made one phone call on the worst day of my life, the people she loved, and the causes she believed in, and the students she had never met but would have helped anyway, they all knew it. Some things take a lifetime to be recognized. Margaret's took one phone call. If this story stayed with you, hit that like button and subscribe to Dad's True Revenge. Every week, stories about the people who do the right thing and the extraordinary things that happen when they do. Drop a comment. Tell me what you would have done with that phone call. And remember, the best things people build, they build quietly. And the best people recognize that, even when it costs them something. See you next week.